Welcome everybody to Sustainable River Basin Management Module 3.2, Part 5, last part. Today I want to talk to you about the role of corporates in sustainable river basin management. Now, what are corporates in sustainable river basin management at all? We are talking about global enterprises and which may play a role in sustainable river basin management because they have a social corporate responsibility. They may even have in-house departments which deal with sustainability in various aspects. We also mean industry associations, which, for instance, the case of the German Technical and Scientific Association for Gas and Water. We also mean by this the smallholder associations, which may bring together several farmers or several small-scale businesses. We also mean industries or companies adhering to certain environmental standards, which may also undergo accreditation processes, which influence how water is being used. Some of those you may have heard about already, just examples. Fair trade is one, organic farming certifications. There are several globally, but also nationally, countries have different schemes for those. There are ecotourism certifications of how you manage your water is one of the indicators there. There's Forest Stewardship Council, or there's another extractive industries transparency initiative which brings together mining industries to monitor themselves. Those we mean, and we mean also companies which conduct audits or compliance checks in this context of these accreditation processes or in-house self-compliance checks within companies. Now, how does it link to water? Well, industries and agriculture are bulk water consumers. That's how it is. And moreover, there is a trend to sustainable corporate water management, which we can observe. This means that there is an in-house analysis taking place of the process water cycle, which means the water being needed to produce a certain product, a certain service industry. And this analysis in the first place has been done to either improve efficiency, to reduce the amount of water that required, because even it's bulk consumers, it costs something to get the water, or there may be water scarcity and water may not be available, or the water quality may be so that water has to be processed to be usable in the production cycle. So this is an entire process chain that we are not discussing in this river basin management course, but it's part of the sustainable corporate water management practices. And obviously such companies also do this not just for economic reasons, but also for compliance reasons if there are legal conditions in place for something like this. So, and then we have industries which provide water. They may be in water supply, they may be in distribution, they may be in water and sewage treatment technologies specifically. And then we have industries and service sectors which may have social corporate responsibility inbuilt into their industries or services. There may also be a legal obligation or even a voluntary contribution to resources replacement. Some of those companies may be planting trees, more often you hear about this, or they may have to do biodiversity offsets and so on. And those industries and services also appear in the financing of water infrastructure. Those are the major links of these corporates to the water. Now, there are some mechanisms in the industry which are self-regulating, and I just want to briefly touch upon this and where we find ourselves in this again. So what we usually have is that there's a consumer demand for a certain product or a certain service, and a company responds to this by producing and supplying this demanded good or service. And this has been done in a way that maximizes profit. So the chain is produce that and obtain a maximum profit. And this usually results in a resource depletion and degradation as we observe it. And this may go on for a while in a very successful way. The consumer may be satisfied and the companies may make their maximum profit. But eventually this will break down and force the entire industry, not just one company, to move to another region where the resources are available, or that entire industry may eventually die out, like it has happened for some of the plantations, orange plantation or banana plantations, or even the fishery industry in some areas. So in this, the faster this whole circle rotates, the better it is, and the larger the profit will be, and we assume that we will have a happy consumer on the side. Now, this can also be completely different, and this is what we see increasingly happening in terms of lifestyle change, which come also linked to knowledge, linked to education, and better awareness of processes of our planetary boundaries. So in this case, we would say that we have a consumer that has changed the way she takes decision and demands a product. They not only demand a product, but they also would demand some background information to the product. What is in it? Where was it produced? How, under which conditions have those people who work in these industries been paid, or what are the working conditions in such industries which provide those goods and services? Those are the questions which are driven by the consumers, and which force some of the companies to adapt and change the way they interact with the consumer and the way they interact with their source areas. So, and some may adapt, and this will draw more and more companies into this adaptation process taking place, and it brings a new relationship to light, which adds to the pure profit-making, trust-building exercise, a lasting business approach, and this also changes product prices. Usually it rises the price, which the consumer in the service that I've seen in many cases accept that rise in price when the information fed back to the consumer is actually in line with the lifestyle principles that consumer wants to perform. And then we see companies being replaced also, new companies form, and which are maybe more adequate to respond to this new relationship here. Now this is self-reinforcing again. Companies will be pushed out or bad practices will be pushed out of this business, and more the companies will have to change. But in some of the cases, this will not just happen out of itself, because companies always have another opportunity to move to another continent or another country where maybe the demand in these information and this trust building is not as developed, or then in such cases the state will have to improve regulation, environmental regulation and environmental enforcement of these regulation, and to build in, to draw and force such bad practices into a new direction. Now, this is quite important to see and note what each of us as an individual can do, and you will be working in some industry at some point, or you are already working in some industry. Again, you can see where exactly is your company in this picture and what has been going on or is going on in this. Now, what do we expect from these corporate sectors in water, and why do we actually take this up here? Now, well, there should be inherited self-interest to maintain a resource base, or shouldn't it? There should also be a market-driven management for success that is potentially applicable to water resource management. That's what we would think. Also, those companies a source of capital investment for large water supply systems. So we look towards these corporates to see if they can actually jumpstart some of these large capital investments for water supply systems. We would also think that applied science, close to what people need, the understanding of what works and what doesn't, and the human resources are available in these corporate companies which could feed into the water sector, improving the water sector. And we also very often see in developing scenarios that the idea is to involve the corporate sector to pull, for instance, the informal sector, for instance, the informal water sector, into a formalized system and help upscale, small scale, maybe also community-based solutions. Those are expectations, and the question is what is the response, what actually is happening? Well, the relevance between companies and water. That was investigated in a study very recently, and that survey was conducted by the UN Industrial Development Organization, a division of the UN. It's simply a survey, and there was a few-point report produced and published in 2015, very recent. And they surveyed a mix of primary, secondary, and service sector industries and asked a number of questions. And I'm just showing you a few which give us an idea of how these previous questions that I raised can be brought into a context and maybe partially be answered. One of the questions was, to what extent are water management issues relevant to your company overall business strategy? Companies have a business strategy, and how does water management play into this? Or does it play into it at all? And then we have a division here between the different continents from where those interviewed companies came from. And then we have a subdivision here between the leaders or the responsibles of these businesses, these companies, and the more technical or more productive personnel from these companies. What we generally can see that a majority of these, whatever companies, and remember mixed primary, secondary service, not all are really primarily within water using, like beverages or water using industries. Some of them are also in service sectors or a bit distant from water as a primary resource going into the production process. And still 70% of those companies see this as a relevant, water management as a very relevant point. There is a huge difference, however, between the European-based companies and, for instance, the companies based on the other continents, especially in Central South America, where this awareness seems to be much higher. Now, which has to do with the climatic conditions, but not only. Now, another following question to that was, how has your company undertaken water management initiatives in the last 5 years? And what was questioned especially was, what are the reasons that led your company to undertake those water management actions? And there's a list here of the responses, and we have response, a positive response by about 44%. Less than half of orders have undertaken water management initiatives in the last 5 years, and out of those 44%, they have given reasons for doing that. And very important here is not what appears here the largest, which is compliance with law and regulation. So it shows the importance of state regulation, a strong influence of government, but also it shows here how important the consumer behavior is, and this feedback loop that I introduced to you before. The reputation, the safeguarding of assets, the performance, the need to disclose, to be accountable for water performance, the pressure from the consumer themselves and from the stakeholders has become one very important reason. So summing all this up, this portion here is much more important to why those companies have actually conducted any of the water management initiatives. You see large differences between continents here again, and again here the Latin American continent has been playing a large role, is above the average here in terms of the safeguarding assets. But we also see that the consumer and stakeholder importance is very high in Asia, for instance. The disclosure of the information on the water performance has been very high, comparably high in Europe. So this shows some differences taking place between the continents, but the overall average here is very much putting sort of the finger back to the consumer behavior in the first place. And compliance and with laws and regulation is just a frame that can facilitate and maybe accelerate some of this to take place. Now, let's look into the follow-up question, which was looking into the benefits which the company achieved from the actions in water management. And again, it is very much related to the consumer behavior, which is they improve their reputation and they improve the relationships with the stakeholders. So it's driven on what is demanded from the consumer end and not from the industry coming out of the industry itself. Again, the frame is important. They just followed the law, 27%, but equally important that consumer, the stakeholder-driven request that influences the decision here. Now, again, we can see differences between the various continents here. We can see that environmental incidents or accidents are fairly important and were a major reason of investing in water management initiatives, because those accidents were reduced by quite a large number on, for instance, the Asian continent and Latin America and Latin American companies. So this is very interesting to see. And yet another aspect to this is how those companies rated themselves in terms of being mature for water management. How knowledgeable are they about water management? And they had the option to rate themselves as a beginner and up to being a leader in this field of water management. And this is interesting here to see that very many of them rated themselves as beginner or being sort of close to a beginner. 26% here and 17% is being really close to a beginner or just getting into it, which shows that we cannot really expect very much right now from the corporate sector in general. unless it's been driven much more by the consumers and the stakeholders, the shareholders in those companies. Another question that was investigated was to look into what are the obstacles in those companies to improve on water management issues. And as you have seen from how they rate their own knowledge base in water management, you would also not expect so much from. The question is then what actually makes them being such limited or at such a immature state right now, although water has been discussed all over for decades of years as a primary, very important resource in not just industries, for life. Now, what we see here is that there are huge differences between how the productive or the technical staff is assessing the obstacles and how the leaders or the responsible staff is assessing those obstacles. And interesting here is that the CEOs or the leaders or heads of these companies, close to 50% actually say, well, there's no barriers. Actually, we can do it anytime. We could start now if this is something we have to do or which becomes a priority. Whereas the technical staff does not rate it this high, but they rather see the lack of financial resources as important, or the lack of return. They see this from a more economic point, what actually keeps our business up and running, what maintains our jobs. The important also is that many of them see this, that the business orientation, looking at short-term results, not having a long-term strategy in place, and that's why not putting so much emphasis into the water resource management. So this is very interesting to see how different levels of influence in such companies rated. And then we have a question on, is your company going to invest in the water management in the next 5 years? And what we can see is that that we have a large block here on, yes, we will invest more into it, or we may just continue the way we have been doing it. But there's also a fairly large percentage that actually says that they would not invest into this at all, into water management. And this is quite high in some of the regions, like in Asia or also North America, which are actually facing water scarcity or water pollution as major impacts on businesses. Business had to close down in Asian countries because of the water pollution, so which is part of the water management. But yet those companies do not see this as one of the priorities here. On the other hand, you have very high interest in investing into the water management compared to the other continents, above 50% in the Latin American companies. So this is also interesting to see where we as consumers can influence this, but also as water managers in the future, and also how government regulation could change this figure here towards more initiative coming from the corporate sector towards sustainable water management. Now let's look briefly into the water supply sector, because this is a sector, an industry that is dealing with water every day. They have to find the water, they have to make sure that adequate amounts of water are available and that the water is safe and has good quality. So there's a knowledge in this, and it's the prime business of these industries. So, and they deal with the technical safety and hygiene in water business. They also deal with the optimization of the water supply technology. They also deal with the resources protection and stewardship, with water quality management and quality management in the entire process. They also contribute to regulations and norms. They also conduct in parts themselves, or they help develop certification and compliance monitoring. And they play a major role in know-how transfer from the academia to industries and to community and households. So in those, we can see the influence of these industries directly. Now, what I want to take up now a little bit closer is the resources protection and the stewardship. Well, why is there an reason at all for an interest in water pollution control from these industries? If they want to maximize water provision to an end user who pays for the amount of water that is being delivered. Now, there are additional costs to having to treat water. So if we have to add chemical treatment, several levels of chemical treatment, that's an additional cost. There must be new technologies developed and installed. There's investment necessary for the installation of such technologies when contamination is taking place, or when pollution, one single event has impacted the water quality of the source of water that's been abstracted. So there's a interest in removing or reducing those costs. So it's for such suppliers more economic and less of a risk to human health if the water source is protected from contamination in the first place. So this is a pure economic reason, which, however, has a long trail, taking us also to sustainable management objectives. Now, let's look into the best practices in water supply. And the best is being implemented right now is a so-called multi-barrier system, which takes the protection of water throughout the entire water supply chain. This means it starts from the source of the water. It includes the water resources, which means the aquifer, the water body, the land where the water comes from, where those streams come from, and where the water capturing facilities, the supply system, distribution system, up to the household installation. So this is a very comprehensive system which helps reduce costs and risks and surprises in those water supply chains. Now, let's look into this a little bit closer. In the first place, we have this consequent protection of drinking water resources. That means the protection of drinking water source areas, which includes surface and groundwater, and the implementation of a monitoring system linked to this drinking water abstraction. And then we have at the second stage the drinking water supply system and management, which includes the abstraction point, abstraction techniques, treatment, storage, transportation, and distribution of water as a whole chain, from what type of material we use there, what type of technologies are used to treat the water, to transport it, to store it, how long it will be stored. All this is part of this drinking water supply system management, and all this has to work with state-of-the-art technology and best practices. Stepping into this water protection and source water area protection. Not all of the countries have provisions to declare or protect such areas, but they have introduced something that is called a non-statutory safeguard zone. And such safeguard zones are areas in which water is abstracted for drinking water supply and emphasis on drinking water supply, and where human activities can impact negatively on quality of this water. So there's an expectation that potentially some of the human activities can have a negative impact, and we try to prevent such things from happening. For that reason, safeguard zones are created. And interesting in this is that this has been implemented as a joint initiative between environmental agencies and water companies, such water supply companies. And this is to basically avoid additional costs for water treatment in the first place and secure water for industries, for residents, for people in general. Now, let's look into the third part of this multi-barrier system, looking into the household installation. And this is a very important part also, which is often left out because we only make sure that water is taken to the road or to the doorstep of a household, but important also is what happens then from this point onwards. And this means that we have to make sure and produce the materials, make them available in the markets at a cost that is affordable to people, that those materials which come into contact with water are good and not adding pollutants to the water, that the water quality that was delivered to the household within the household distribution system is not deteriorated, that there are safety valves in place, that there's a professional installation of these systems being done, that water conservation is being observed, and water efficiency is important. There are technologies for this, that water amounts or water quantities can be controlled and much more efficiently be used today at household level through these new technologies. Now, finally, I would like to speak about white papers, those inputs from such water companies or companies in the water sector on certification and on regulatory frames, on regulations and laws. Those companies provide inputs in the form of so-called white papers to policies, to laws, to technical regulations, but also to strategic planning of governments. And those are very important and should not be underestimated in terms of knowledge input, and also in terms of influence. Now, just an example of some of these guiding principles which were developed by industry associations in the form of individual white papers which were adopted by these industries. One of those known probably to you is the precautionary principle. This is to prevent rather than causing the prohibition of deterioration, the mandatory remediation target values that industries, not only households, but industries, water users, bulk water users have a mandate to remediate down to certain target values which have to be defined somewhere. The order to stop trends of deteriorating quality and quantity, coupled with binding targets for actions, very specific again. This is to stop certain trends, even if the problem as such, or the pollution is at a level where we would not call it problematic at this point. It's accumulating, it's adding up, and as the quality deteriorates, at one point we reach a dipping point, which then results in catastrophic situations with regard to water quality and quantity. So, and this should be linked to action. There should be clear targets. There should be a clear knowledge on what is what is the baseline against which we are monitoring our trend here, and what is a range in which no action is required, and what is above the range where action should be triggered, and what type of action should then happen and be triggered. Should industries be shut down, for instance, or should agriculture move to different crop production cycles and things like this? What should be the action here, or have in the extreme events when we have crossed certain tipping points? Should a water supply be shut down, or should public water infrastructures like swimming infrastructure be closed for a certain time? Should industries be shut down for that reason? More of these guiding principles are the minimization requirement. This in terms of load, so this requires measurement. A principle that is probably also known to most of you is the polluter pays principle. This is wherever there is pollution be detected in a water body, that there must be a possibility to trace it back to the polluter, and the polluter is made responsible for the cleaning up of the pollution. In many cases, this may not be possible, as we've talked about those non-point pollution sources. In many cases, it may be possible to trace it back to a certain polluting industry, but it may be in the informal sector and difficult to handle under the legal frame that exists. There are many reasons for why this polluter pays principle is very difficult to implement, although many countries have included it into their water laws and water regulations. Then the undividable water protection. This means that there's no compromise to be made when it comes to water protection. Water protection is in the first place, and then other things, other priorities can come. The need for prioritized and special protection of catchment areas which host drinking water systems, and this is for drinking water systems. This means when a pipeline has been built from one source area to a large urban area, for instance, that anything that happens along this pathway, this pipeline system, has to be also under a certain special protection to make sure that water arrives safe at its final destination. Now with this I want to close our module 3, the challenges, and now next time we will be moving into the river basin management and the solutions to some of these challenges discussed right now here. I'll see you next time again.